you. And on my behalf also, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's always great to see all of you, many familiar faces. And as always, we shall start with saying it is being recorded as always, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. Therefore, anyone that does not wish to be seen, please feel free to turn your cameras off. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, could you please ensure that your mics are off throughout the session, and afterwards in the Q&A session, of course, you will be free to ask your questions, provided that you use your hand up icons. Once you've done this, we will call out your name, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question freely. You can do this during any time during the talk. Chat will be turned off once again during the talk to keep people from swaying. And as always, Freemasons Without Borders will be giving out two bespoke FWB mugs. For a chance to win, please answer the following question.
In the disabled chat.
We haven't disabled it yet.
Yes, you have.
You have.
Oh, we have?
Oh, it should be undisabled, okay.
It's back on.
It's back on. Okay, good. So the question is, when were the first Masonic statutes written and who wrote them? Please type your answers in the chat section, and the two first correct answers will win. I see some some correct answers. Okay. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the speaker of the evening, our worshipful brother, Chris Hatton. Chris, Senior London Grand Rank, is a passionate Freemason, a member of Pax Humana Lodge 3908 and Claremont Lodge 1861 at the UGLE, as well as St. Magdalene Lodge number 100 in the Scottish Constitution. He is the past Grand Master of the Hermetic Order of Martinists, having held that office for 13 years, as well as being the past Chief Adept of the Southeast countries of SRIA. He had a very close association with Andrew Stevenson the last 15 years that Andrew lived in England, and is, or was, a member of all orders worked at Blackheath. This talk will actually enlighten us on the history and reason for the existence of several orders that have one thing in common: Andrew Stevenson and the House at Blackheath. If you're a member of or are interested in Sir Thomas of Akon, Pilgrim Preceptors, Hermetic Chapter of Spiritual Night, Hermetic Order of Martinists, and the August Order of Light, this talk will be of particular interest to you. Chris was born on May 29, 1959. Has been married to his wife Susan for. He's an avid Masonic researcher, aquarist, interested in the City of London and the livery companies, member of the Turner's Company, the Walbrook Board Club. He is a keen football fan, supporting both Crystal Palace Football Club and his local team, Carshalton Athletic FC, and thoroughly enjoys walking the Thames pathway to its source during lockdown, as well as the North Downsway. So, brethren, I'd like to pass the mic on to Chris. And Chris?
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. I didn't realise I had to say that, but that's great. Andrew Stevenson. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, brethren, Andrew passed away very recently. I had the honour of attending his funeral online just last week, or at the beginning of last week. Andrew died at age 97. So this talk, rather than being the normal talk, it's also a bit of a remembrance of Andrew, who was a remarkable person, as I'm sure once I've finished this talk you'll agree. I'm going to talk, this talk's in obviously sections, but the first section is about how I met Andrew and then a little bit about Andrew, and then we go on to the different orders. So I hope you enjoy it. It's going to take around about 35 minutes. So sit back and hopefully enjoy the talk. So good evening. It is my great pleasure this evening to present a talk on a wonderful Mason, who in my opinion does not get the recognition he deserves, as well as talking about his house in Blackheath and the orders and degrees that will work from there, and indeed either started there or were helped from going extinct because Andrew Stevenson allowed and encouraged them to meet in his temple in the loft. I was privileged to meet Andrew at my reception into Antioch Rose Choir, chapter number 10, in 1996, where he was a member and the chapter organist, although I did not actually get to know him until 2000. And this started what I consider to be my awakening into the esoteric side of Freemasonry. I was received into Norman Stanford College of the Society of Rosy in Anglia and was absolutely bowled over by the ceremony. At this meeting, Right Worthy Frater Steve Turner, the then Assistant Secretary General, gave a report on the condition of the headquarters at Stanfield Hall. There had been a major water leak in the roof and the builders had made an awful mess. Stephen reported it would probably take the best part of 6 months to put the building back in use. I was so impressed with the ceremony and the fact that I ran a cleaning company, I volunteered my company's services to get things sorted quickly. After agreeing with Right Worthy Frater Brian Lobb, the then Secretary General, how things would be carried out, the following weekend, over those 2 days, we completely cleaned and replaced everything in the hall, including every single book down from the shelf in the library, and the library is extensive. Andrew was amazed and said it was better than ever. So he was so impressed, he asked that I made myself known to him at Antioch chapter, which I did, and the rest is history. We became great friends, and this friendship was to last until Andrew's retirement to New Zealand at the age of 83, 85. This is how I met Andrew, which began an incredible journey of discovery for me. I'm going to talk about several orders tonight, and they are the Sir Thomas of Akon, Pilgrims Preceptor, the Hermetic Chapter of Spiritual Night, the Hermetic Order of Martinists, the August Order of Light, and also a non-Masonic order, Arthur Waite's Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. I will try to give you an insight into Andrew as a man and a Mason, and how his house in Blackheath played a major part in the history of every one of those degrees. Along with my good friend and brother Simon Polkinghorne, who has contributed greatly to the contents of this talk, we belong to or have belonged to every order that I'm talking about, and in both our cases joined some of these orders at Blackheath. Andrew was a very enthusiastic Mason who really enjoyed the spiritual and esoteric side of Freemasonry. He spent nearly all his working life working for the Bank of England until his move to New Zealand. He had lived his entire life at Westcombe Park Road, being born there and living right through until he retired. He had a brother who was not a Mason. However, he was a civil engineer who spent a lot of time working in South America, particularly Bolivia, where he was employed to assist in building the Bolivian state railway system. He was Andrew's elder brother, and I believe has just celebrated his 100th birthday. Andrew's father was a renowned stamp collector and used to write the introduction to the annual Stanley Gibbons stamp publication. He gave Andrew his love of philately, and I once had the privilege of perusing Andrew's collection, and I have never before seen 9 twopenny blue stamps in mint condition on the same page, and I doubt if I ever will again. Andrew led a very simple life. He owned a television, but never watched it, apart from watching his collection of Laurel and Hardy films, and he never failed to laugh every time he watched the film. He was also an avid model railway enthusiast, probably from his brother's love of railway as well. Many brethren who met at the house will always remember seeing his train set laid out in the front room, and lo and behold, anyone trying to play with it. He was to all extent and purpose a true eccentric. He had no ego and was a true gentleman. He had 2 great passions: the Metropolitan Study Group that had monthly meetings at the SRA Hampstead HQ, at which those that attended were always surprised and delighted to be looked after by Andrew. Tea or coffee was always the welcome. And his other passion was the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, Arthur Waite's alternative order to the Golden Dawn. And this subject is worthy of another paper alone. He was a member of a lot of orders, as you can imagine. However, he concentrated his efforts on only a few. He loved the Rose Choir, Order of the Secret Monitor, and the Allied Masonic degrees. The orders he put a lot of effort into and attained high ranking were obviously the SRIA, where he was the Supreme Magus, the Pilgrim Preceptor, where he was past Grand Master, the August Order of Light, where he was past Nomak of Garuda number 2, Sir Thomas of Akon, where he was past Grand Master, and the Spiritual Knight, where he was past Grand Master, Hermetic Order of Martinists, past Grand Master. He also held very high rank in the operatives. The house in Blackheath. The house was situated in Westcombe Park Road and was on a corner plot. The thing that struck everyone was the size of the old German Gutenberg printer in the hall. The first floor was decked out with shelf upon shelf of books that Andrew had printed at no cost for the SRIA Metropolitan Study Group, and other esoteric books for his own perusal, along with an almost complete collection of ARS from the QCC annual publication. There was then the staircase that led to the temple in the loft. Anyone who has ever been through a ceremony in this temple will tell you it was an incredible experience. There was a space for a maximum of 22 to 25 people. It also contained a fully sized church organ, which needed a crane to lift it in through the roof. And there is the organ, as you can see. Now, I've reached the point where I will talk about the different orders with some personal reflections of mine, as well as Simon's. Before I start, I'm going to give you some names, and I will return to some of these names as we go along. They all play a greater or lesser role in the orders that I'm going to talk about. John Walker, Donald Penrose, Desmond Burke, Barry Clark, David Kibble-Rees, Howard Stokes, Benson Catt, Stephen Ayres, Keith Ansell, Ralph Wheeler, Michael Buckley, John Paternoster, Howard Doe, David Price, Gordon Gentry, Ronald Pike, George Cope, John Mitchell, Yasha Bereshina, and of course my good friend Simon Polkinghorne. This is by no means a full and extensive list. However, all of these men have met at the temple in Blackheath and been involved in the growth and development of the Blackheath Degrees and orders. So now we get on to the first of the orders I'm going to talk about. And it's probably the most successful order that has come out of Blackheath, Sir Thomas of Akon. Andrew's close friendship with John Walker and his house already having a temple in the loft, it was an obvious choice to be the place where the first meetings of this fledgling English chivalric order would be held. The temple was big enough to hold comfortably 25 members and uncomfortably perhaps 30. Let's face it, no one could perceive the order would either attract much attention nor certainly outgrow the space. Now, before we talk about the order, this is a wonderful document that Howard Doe sent to me, and it is actually the patent handing over to John Walker to become the Sovereign Grand Master from Desmond Burke. Now, you might find it strange that Desmond Burke handed the order over to John Walker, but John had done all the research and didn't want to be Grand Master to start with. So we go on the talk. John Walker was a keen Masonic researcher, and in fact was researching the 4 original lodges when he came across reference to the Order of St. Thomas of Akon. Please note, this is not a talk on the concise history of the order. I can just say something about the order resonated with John, and he put aside his researches into the 4 original lodges in favour of digging deeper into Akon. He eventually came across a ceremony of installation of a Knight of Acre and decided to write a ritual for a new Masonic order based on the researches he had made. So in 1974, the first meeting of the new independent Masonic order commenced. There was no consecration. Knowing Andrew, I'm sure there was a prayer. Blackheath Chapel, time immemorial, was born, although at the start it was not known as Blackheath Chapel, only the name of the order, St. Thomas of Akon. For 24 years, the order met at Andrew's house. John Walker retired and Andrew took over as Grand Master. The order slowly, and it was very slow, grew, and by 1997, it had become impossible for all the members to meet at once. Andrew retired as Grand Master and handed the reins over to Barry Clark. Barry was a wonderful Mason and had great plans for the order. The chapel relocated to Mark Mason's Hall and was named the Blackheath Chapel time immemorial. Barry had organised for the regalia to be manufactured in a similar style to the Knights Templar, and as you can see, it's a well-manufactured regalia these days, but it used to be handmade apron, handmade orb, cloak, and the scallop shells were real scallops. At the first meeting in Mark Mason's Hall, there were 33 candidates admitted. One of those candidates, and indeed the representative candidate, was Simon Polkinghorne. Under Barry Clark, the order became firmly established and started to grow very rapidly. Certain regions really took to the order. Yorkshire, for instance, had 4 of the first 20 chapels in its province. Barry was a remarkable Freemason and one of the most genuine and kindest men I have ever known. Whilst he was alive and all the time he knew me, he never failed once to send a letter of congratulations each and every time I received the Masonic honour, and I have been honoured quite a few times. Every time it would be a short and complimentary email. I often imagine him scrolling through every honours list and getting straight on his computer, because I know he did this not just for me, but for several other friends of mine as well. Barry was Grand Master for 5 years. He was replaced by David Kibble-Rees, another worthy Mason of mention. David is a Masonic researcher and has written books on the operatives and Sir Thomas of Akon, as well as others. He also held office of the Grand Master for 5 years and handed over to Brian Long. As you can see, we have travelled a long way from Blackheath. The order has expanded into the USA, which is now an independent grand body, and they hold their annual meetings during Washington AMD week, normally in February. Both myself, Simon, and quite a few of our friends have had the privilege of attending these meetings on at least 3 occasions. And the first one was actually before the USA became an independent order. I do not exaggerate in saying Sir Thomas of Akon is the most successful order to come out of Blackheath. It has over 120 chapels in England and Wales, and I believe the USA have now over 2,000 members. I wonder what John Walker would make of this order now. I'm now going to go on to the Masonic Order of Pilgrim Preceptors. Again, it has to be acknowledged that the close friendship that Andrew had with John Walker meant that when John decided to progress with starting the order, he would automatically use the house in Blackheath. But a quick bit of history. In the first quarter of the 20th century, and in any way after 1925, 3 actors and masons must have found in a library or a Masonic hall or a lodge somewhere in northwestern England, most probably in the greater Liverpool area, an unknown ritual of Irish origin drafted in the year 1862, which served as the basis of their version of the ritual of the 2 ceremonies of or belonging to the degree of the Order of Pilgrim Preceptors. All 3 were past masters of the craft, past first principals of the Royal Arch, and members of the Allied Masonic degrees. They found themselves idle and forced to remain in their hotel in Manchester for a long and typically wet weekend. Because the play in which they had been performing suddenly folded, they decided to put this information together and write and develop a Masonic ceremony called the Pilgrim Preceptors. This they had completed by the end of the weekend. One of these men was a guy called Albert Lefray. He died shortly before his 100th birthday and passed the rituals on to his son, Eric. Eric notably did nothing with these original manuscripts until at an elderly age himself was persuaded by John Walker to confer the order by obligation on himself for a princely sum of 1/2 penny. So in 1978, 1 year before his death, he gave John Walker the manuscript and all the rights to the order. And that is how we came to see the Masonic Order of Pilgrim Preceptors meeting at Blackheath. The first candidates were Captain Donald Michael Penrose, Andrew Barry Stevenson, of course, George Austin Duke, Arthur William Gerry, and Howard Allen Stokes. Almost immediately, John Walker conferred the Grand Mastership onto Howard Stokes, simply because he was so involved with Sir Thomas of Akon that he couldn't do both jobs. There is very little furniture required in a conclave of Pilgrim Preceptors, so Blackheath was an excellent location. The order remained static until Benson Franklin Catt and Brian Gerald Slater persuaded Howard Stokes to get the order moving again. So on the 8th of December 1984, Benson Catt, Brian Slater and Alan Perry were obligated into the order. Howard Stokes announced his retirement as Grand Master, and because both Brian Slater and another senior member, Norman Pitt, had both died tragically young, John Walker became the Grand Master, appointing Andrew as his deputy. Sadly, John Walker died in 1991, and on the 4th of September 1993, Andrew took over the role as Grand Master. The order then started to meet regularly in the mornings of the same day that the meeting of the August Order of Light met. This obviously meant that all the members at this time were also members of the August Order of Light. Like Sir Thomas of Akon, the order remained very small. However, in 1998, Howard Doe requested a charter for a preceptory to be granted to work in Kent. This was duly granted, and the very first additional unit was born and consecrated. It was titled the St. Augustine Preceptory, and Howard was the first master. You will note that the first units were called preceptories and not conclaves. This changed sometime between 1999 and 2003. We know this because the third unit was consecrated in York, and it was called the Athelstan Conclave. I will mention the fourth unit because where it was held, its meetings ties in with this talk later. It was the Prince Edwin Conclave, and it met at Radlett in Hertfordshire and was consecrated later the same year. Now, to qualify for membership, one had to be a past Sir Rubberball, and the original regalia of the order was a past Sir Rubberball's apron and jewel. Once you were admitted, you wore a special jewel hanging from a brown pilgrim or white pilgrim preceptor collarette. This is now changed to a purple sash, and you get a Grand Master's sash, which is obviously embroidered with a lot more gold. An interesting anecdote for you, Hauler, is that Brenton Catt, who was the Grand Master, wrote the ceremony of installation of Grand Master, but he never actually took the ceremony himself, which is quite unusual, I'm sure. I was admitted into the order in a very peculiar situation. The unit of Blackheath moved out, and in 2005-2006 met at the St. Bride's Foundation just off Fleet Street. I had been summoned to attend at 11 o'clock on the 26th of August 2006. On arrival, Ralph Wheeler met me and the other candidate and informed us that due to a double booking, they could not hold the meeting in the normal room, and we were going to be admitted in the kitchen. I kid you not. I became a Pilgrim Preceptor in the kitchen of the St. Bride's Institute in the presence of the Grand Master sitting on an upside-down kitchen bucket, and members scattered around the kitchen behind various kitchen appliances. It was indeed memorable. Like Sir Thomas of Akon, the order has grown impressively. Both myself and Simon Polkinghorne were honoured to be founders of the first unit to work in the USA, and on the 14th of February 2010, the Mayflower Conclave was consecrated at Radlett. Benson Catt announced his resignation as Grand Master in 2011, and Stephen Ayres became his successor. Stephen was very busy as Grand Master and consecrated several more units. One further milestone in the order's history was added when members of the Grand Conclave, including David Price, consecrated a new conclave on the continent of Europe, an event that took place in Athens, Greece in April 2019. The future certainly looks certain for the order. It already has 34 conclaves on its register. Unfortunately, Stephen died unexpectedly last year. However, he had made it known that his wish was for Jonathan Roberts to be Grand Master, and this was accordingly carried out. And that concludes my talk on the history of the Blackheath Order of the Masonic Order of Pilgrims Preceptor. We now move on to the Hermetic chapter of Spiritual Night, a very small order. Ivan Vladimirovich was a Russian philosopher, mystic, writer, and humanitarian. He was born in 1756 and was a leading figure in Russian Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and Martinism, being introduced to these philosophical systems by his good friend Nikolai Novikov. He wrote several books, two of which are extremely important to this talk. The first, for obvious reasons, in 1791, was The Rite of Reception into the Degree of Spirit, and the second, in 1798, Some Characteristics of the Inner Church. I know the library at Hampstead used to have a copy of the Inner Church, but unfortunately it has been lost. A quick note here is Lepukin wrote several other books, and the one that particularly stands out to me and was written in 1795 is called, and please wait for this, The Description of Several Pictures and Tableaus based on some fragments which are located in the archives of internal affairs explaining the motives, actions, and downright blindness of the corrupt Frenchman. That is the title of the book. It was also considered to be something of a politician. Maybe it was the start of Brexit all those years ago. Who knows? Fast forward to 1924, and we find that Boris Telepnev, 1905-2004, a member of the Society Rosicrucian Anglia, wrote a first attempt at creating a ceremony out of the Rite of Reception. And this book and paper was again in the library at Hampstead. I believe that Desmond Burke, a leading esotericist and also a Freemason, Rosicrucian and Martinist, together with other like-minded individuals, one of whom would have been John Walker, collated these rituals to form the ceremony which started its life at Blackheath. This order was originally only open to fully qualified Martinists of Hermetic Order of Martinists, and a candidate would enter wearing the white Martinist orb. It was worked very infrequently at Blackheath, normally for the reception of a candidate. There were no certificates issued and very minimal minutes recorded. At the time Andrew announced his intention to retire to New Zealand, he appointed John Paternoster as the new Grand Master. Shortly after his appointment, a meeting was held at Blackheath. This was attended by 6 members, including the Grand Master and Andrew Stevenson, and I, along with Simon and 9 other candidates, were admitted to the order. It was a memorable and very spiritual experience. And this was actually the last meeting, and they're the minutes, as you can see. They're not what you call normal Masonic minutes. Within a month of this meeting, the order vacated Blackheath and was split into 2 units. One group moved into Radlett, and the other went down to Ronald Pike's house in Otford. His house had the name Keitha, so that was the name adopted by the unit. The order started to grow very slowly, and with the Grand Master removing the requirement of being a culminated Martinet, it found a recruitment a lot easier. I know Radlett flourished. However, due to the size, Keitha still kept the requirement, really because there was no more room for about 10 people to meet. A major occurrence for the order was the admission of David Lee Hargett Jr. David was an extremely well-known and experienced American Mason and would be involved in the consecration of the first unit in USA. The unit at Otford was becoming too big and a large number of members were from Sutton, Kingston area, so a petition was put into the Grand Master in 2009, and later that year the Sirius chapter of Spiritual Night was the first chapter to be consecrated at the Thomas Wall Centre in Sutton. And I was extremely honoured to be its first master. On that occasion, another first for the order was that Rod Barnes from Australia was the first Australian candidate to be admitted. The Sirius chapter was very busy in its first year. David Hargett Jr. was a regular attendee, and he put forward 3 excellent American Masons in the persons of Ed Fowler, who unfortunately is deceased, Alan Surratt and Erin Shoemaker. The 4 were to form the nucleus, along with Matthew Dupay, who was admitted in Radlett, of the first unit to be consecrated outside of England. Myself and Simon, acting as Director of Ceremonies, along with the Grand Master John Paternoster and John Wicks, attended Washington Allied Masonic Degree Week in 2015, and the Azoth chapter of Spiritual Night was consecrated. The order perhaps remains the smallest that has come out of Blackheath, but it is slowly expanding under the direction of the Grand Master and has come a long way since Desmond Burke first introduced the order to the house. The August Order of Light, Garuda number 2. So far, I've only dealt with orders that actually started life at the house. The August Order of Light did not start here or anywhere near Blackheath. It started its life in Bradford. However, again, this is not a history lesson, but I will talk briefly. I will tell you about Garuda number 2, for many years the only other temple of the order and its place in the story of the house at Blackheath, but a little bit of history first. The order is based on some Hindu ideas. In fact, the 3 central figures in the ritual are the Hindu gods Shiva, Brahma and Vishnu. It was started by Vidal Portman, a nephew of Viscount Portman, when he was Deputy Governor of the Andaman Islands. It is a system very similar to that of the Sat Baha'i. In Portman's time, it was incomprehensible to the Freemasons of Bradford, until finally at the turn of the 20th century, he handed the ritual over to 2 worthy Masons to do what they could with it. Andrew Stevenson suspected that with the assistance of Dr. William Wynne Westcott, a major player in the SRIA, being the Supreme Magus, assisted them in reducing the rituals down to 3 degrees, the first degree, the passing degree, and the second degree. They added some Masonic symbolism and the order came into being. Andrew and Fred Scott, later become Arch-President, were friends and were junior members in the order in the 1960s. Andrew regularly travelled to Bradford to attend the meetings. The order remained very small and very elite until around 1970. At this time, Bradford Council ordered the building to be demolished because there had been a fire and it was deemed unsafe. This created a unique opportunity for Andrew and John Walker, for they were allowed to set up a new temple in Blackheath. Thus, Garuda Temple number 2 came into being. This worked very favourably for the order because it meant that it continued to be worked whilst a new temple was sourced, funded and consecrated in York, where it remained until moving finally to Halifax, where it continues to be based today. So once again, a few men who regularly attended Blackheath happily started to meet 3 times a year in the temple at Blackheath from 1972 onwards. And once again, the unit grew slowly but steadily. There have been some well-known Masons who have attended and passed through Blackheath for the August Order of Light, among them Barry Clark, Gordon Gentry, George Cope, Ian Burnett, John Micho, Leo Zanelli, John Paternoster, Stephen Ayres, Benson Catt, Michael Buckley and James Field are all distinguished Freemasons. Once again in 2005, Andrew, having announced his intention to retire to New Zealand, he started to arrange for Garuda number 2 to move to Radlett in Hertfordshire. However, candidates were still being allowed to enter and also give their papers. The last candidate at Blackheath was Simon Polkinghorne. The paper he gave was a short history of horror films, which went down exceedingly well. Simon was then promptly made secretary. Andrew agreed that a Garuda number 2 should relocate to Radlett, a move not entirely popular with all the members. However, the decision being made, Simon was charged with moving all the furnishings to Radlett, where Ralph Wheeler took control of the moving in. Andrew appointed Michael Buckley as Nomarch, which is the head of Garuda number 2, and remained an attendee until he moved to New Zealand. A little anecdote here was I was invited to attend Radlett soon after it moved, and I was asked to go on the 2nd of September 2006. I arrived to give the paper, and then if being successful, I would be initiated into the 1st degree. My paper was entitled Reflections on My Diving Career, and I was extremely nervous. This nervousness was not assisted by being introduced to one of those listening, a certain Leo Zanelli, a world-leading expert on scuba diving and indeed the editor of Dive magazine. Once finished, I was dreading the Q&As that was to follow. However, Leo was a perfect gentleman, very complimentary, and even commented that he'd learned something new today. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think he was just being nice. With the arrival of 2 new arch-presidents, Michael Lee and Philip Standfast, the order has started to expand. There are now temples in India, the USA, New Zealand, and also another one in England. Unfortunately, due to the difficulty of travelling across Greater London, which, as you know, can take anything up to 2.5 hours, several members, including myself, have had to resign from Garuda number 2. We had hoped to form a new temple either in Sutton or Bromley, where we had interest from over 20 esoterically minded Masons, but unfortunately this application was turned down. I continue to wish the order every success. It is quite an extraordinary order and well worth joining if it appeals to you. Now, the picture before was the actual last meeting of the August Order of Light. They took that picture for posterity. And if, as you can see, the names are written there, but a very young Simon Polkinghorne on the right-hand side, and Michael Buckley is the Nomarch in the middle there, with Andrew in just to his side, with Barry Clark sitting behind him. A really lovely order, and that's a lovely photograph. Thank you very much, Eddie. The next picture is the jewel of the order, which is published in Beyond the Craft, so it's not a secret that I'm sharing that I shouldn't be sharing. The next order is the Hermetic Order of Martinists. This is an order that I should know something about, having been Grand Master, but we have spoken about purely Masonic orders. Martinism is not a Masonic order. It is a form of initiatic, esoteric, or mystical Christianity that regards Christ as a Redeemer and aims for the reintegration of man to attain an idealized state. It has been around for a considerable length of time and is based around the philosophy of Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, otherwise known as the unknown philosopher, who lived from 1743 to 1803. The Hermetic Order of Martinists is a Martinist order that is only open to Master Masons of a lodge under the authority of UGLE or a Grand Lodge recognised as regular by UGLE. HOM came into existence in 1984. Up until then, Martinism was being practiced in England under the authority of a couple of Martinist Grand Lodges. However, the one that plays the major part in the formation of the Hermetic Order of Martinists is the Order Martinis Synoeci. In 1984, the late John Emerson, who was to become the first Grand Master, in discussions with John Walker, Desmond Burke and Andrew Stevenson, had for several months been discussing the possibility of forming a separate Martinist order. They belonged to the London Lodge that met at Hampstead and were all members of the SRIA. So John all members of the SR. John Emerson entered into negotiations with Louis Bentin, the then Grand Master of the Order Martinis Synache, and also a prominent F. And eventually, after long discussion, it was agreed that the Hermetic Order of Martinists would be chartered. One of the first lodges to be consecrated, if not the first, was Meridian Lodge that met at Blackheath. And the reason Blackheath plays such an important role in the growth and well-being of the order is very simple. Andrew was to become Grand Master for many years, and he also made great use of that Gutenberg printer I was telling you about in his hallway. The Hermetic Order of Martinists has 3 grades and a celebratory final ceremony. After each grade, the candidates are given a lecture book to study, of which they must be very conversant before they take the next step. Andrew single-handedly printed these books in great numbers, as well as the manuals that are handed to every newly installed master of a lodge. This effort alone ensured the viability of the order. Under leadership, the order spread. John Mitchell, a prominent Brighton Mason involved in starting Brighton Lodge, Howard Doe, who, as you know, started the Pilgrim Preceptors in Kent, and Brian Lobb were involved in starting Medway Lodge in Kent, and George Cope was involved in starting Fenlands in Rushton. Along with Hampstead Lodge, the new name of London Lodge, there were to remain 5 lodges under Andrew's Grand Mastership for a considerable time. There was a Manchester Lodge that unfortunately ceased existing around the time that I became Grand Recorder in 2001. When Andrew announced his intention to emigrate in 2005, he invited me to become Grand Master. This was a complete shock, and I did not feel that I was prepared or qualified for the job, so I respectively declined. Andrew, however, was adamant. However, he respected my decision and asked Michael Buckley to take over. Michael was and is Grand Master of the Martinist Order of Unknown Philosophers, on the understanding that he would appoint me when the time was right. Unfortunately, due to a very public disagreement between Michael and the new Supreme Magus of the SRIA, Michael resigned from the SRIA and felt it best to stand down as Grand Master of HOM. He immediately kept his word to Andrew and invited me to succeed him, and that is how I became Grand Master of HOM in 2007. I am pleased to say that the order has continued to flourish. As I speak, there are 14 active lodges in England and the Netherlands, as well as a couple of Martinist circles, which consist of groups of 7 or less members. I stepped down as Grand Master in December 2019 and installed my successor at Grand Lodge at the same meeting. Grand Lodge meets at Mark Mason's Hall annually in December and has done so since 2006. It is true to say that if Andrew had not opened his temple to HOM, then I doubt it would be alive today. That completes the Hermetic Order of Martinists. Now, for our brothers and sisters and gentlemen and ladies, I'm going to now talk about a non-Masonic order, and this is called the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross. There were several other orders with meetings going on at the house in Blackheath, apart from those already mentioned. Andrew was a bishop in the Gnostic Church, and he used to hold a service every Sunday in the temple. He used to have 5 or 6 attend regularly on a Sunday evening, and he would regularly play 3 or 4 hymns, which were sung with gusto. However, the main order that met at the temple outside Freemasonry was the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, Arthur Edward Waite's order that he created through his desire to replace the magical or theurgic element of the Golden Dawn with a more spiritual path, as in the tradition of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin's Way of the Heart. Waite had been a member of the Golden Dawn for several years and had become increasingly disillusioned with its practices. He was also an accomplished and well-known author, so he set about writing what he considered to be the true path to spiritual reintegration. In my own opinion, I think he was a little bit of a plagiarist, something Andrew and I discussed over a beer several times. There is no doubt he drew heavily on his experience of the Golden Dawn and Martinism. The opening ceremonies are almost identical along with the grade system, and the ceremonial rituals borrowed heavily from the Martinist ones. Nevertheless, he completed his system, and it started in the summer of 1915. Unfortunately, we do not have time to go in depth with the history. However, it is safe to say that by 1943, it was no longer working. It was defunct. Fast forward to 1965, and we know John Semkin, a well-known and respected member of the SRIA, along with several other members, decided to revive the order. I'm not sure when the house at Blackheath became the order's home, nor the date that Andrew was named as Imperator. I do know that when I entered the order, that was the case. Basically, they had still got all the original rituals, so that they recreated the order, as I said, in 1960, the date later on, sorry. The fellowship was to become Andrew's most important work, and it certainly plays a major part in the events leading up to Andrew's retirement to New Zealand. The order was split into two hemispheres, obviously the southern and northern ones. The southern hemisphere had been nurtured by Andrew on his several visits and greatly assisted by him in the years preceding. He was a regular visitor to New Zealand, and they all loved him for his knowledge and guidance. Andrew was one of the most modest men you could ever meet, and he did not want to be imperator in New Zealand. So, in preparation for his move, he appointed Roger Weekes as imperator on his final trip before he retired, or before he was due to retire. Because Andrew had actually become elected as the Supreme Magus of the SRIA and had only served about 2 years. Now, what happened was that Andrew had planned to be 5 years as Supreme Magus and then step down and retire to New Zealand. However, as I said, 2 years in to Andrew's tenureship as being Supreme Magus, what happened was that Roger Weekes had been brutally murdered in his bed. He was stabbed several times by a drunk drug addict. This was the worst thing that could have happened. And it's the first time that I witnessed a total panic that consumed Andrew. He could see the last 10 years of his life's work going up in smoke. So he saw his dream on the verge of collapse and was so worried about the fellowship collapsing, he immediately resigned as Supreme Magus, brought his move forward to New Zealand. Andrew appointed Ronald Pike to take over as imperator, and the order was moved to the Civil Service Club. Unfortunately, we arrived at a major schism within the order. Michael Buckley, who had resigned from the SRIA after losing his election for Supreme Magus to John Paternoster, no longer wanted to attend the fellowship, and he asked Ron Pike if he could form his own chapter, as he held all the appropriate grades. Ron Pike refused this, which caused Michael to resign, and he formed his own version along with Bob Gilbert, the famous author. Ronald, being a very peaceful and cautious man, realised there was a terrible schism and put the order into abeyance. A few years later, he quietly reopened the temple at his home in Oxford. Remember, the spiritual night was also there, and the order was again operating. It then moved to Hampstead, and as Ronald was getting older and had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, he handed over the reins to Alan Remsbury. When Alan was diagnosed with dementia, he took the decision to step down, and there was a problem with finding a legitimate successor. So we find the order now comes full circle because Michael Buckley was approached and invited to assume the role of imperator, and both lines were merged back again today. And this is the order that we have today. Brethren, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to finish this talk with my own personal tribute to Andrew. He may have been small in stature, and he may have been humble, but he was an immensely strong-willed individual. When he thought the lease at Hampstead was going to be sold, as one of the trustees, he immediately got on a plane and flew back to England to attend the High Council meeting at Leeds to speak to the High Council. Luckily, he need not have worried because John Paternoster had taken advice and the sale had been taken off the agenda. However, I drove him back to his hotel, and he looked me in the face and he asked me to do one thing for him. He said, I must do everything in my power to make sure this situation never happens again. And I gave him my word that I would. He was without doubt the most esoterically minded and kind-hearted man I've ever met. He opened his house to all true seekers of knowledge, and he was as eccentric as they come, but he was just a lovely man. God bless Andrew Stevenson for the legacy he has left us. And I thank you for listening. And I now hope you realise what a special person this man was. Thank you. There's people who've got their hands up. I don't know how this works.
Chris, don't worry, we will take it from here.
Okay.
So Tyrus, are you on? You're on mute, Sataris.
You're on mute, Sataris.
Sorry. Hi. Okay, Simon Simon Reeder, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Thank you. 2 great evenings on the trot, as I'm a Palace fan too. My question is, obviously there's lots of orders, and I know some of them are very small, so there wasn't many people, but obviously very residential. How did the neighbours take the fact that it was a Masonic temple and all these different orders turning up?
Well, most of the orders were held on Saturday, and to be honest with you, people were respectful of the parking arrangements. And although there was a lot of houses, there was quite a lot of parking up on the heath, you know, and there were big houses, normally had garages, but they were so big there was enough room for cars to park outside. You know, within 200 yards, most people could park. It never seemed to be a problem, and there were never any complaints.
Excellent, good to hear. Thank you.
Danny Usataris.
Yes, Philippe.
Hello. A very interesting overview of the degrees that I haven't known that much. I wanted to ask you, in your own words, what would be the main differences between SRIA and HOM? Because to me, it seems like they are both kind of pursuing the same objective. Thank you.
They're very similar. I mean, you obviously, most of the membership of HOM comes from the SRIA, but obviously Martinism in general is a type of Rosicrucianism anyway. But the main difference within HOM and the SRIA is quite simple, that it's almost like a filtration system. You know, you get the Master Mason, he fulfills a certain criteria, becomes a member of the SRIA. There are a lot of people within the SRIA that probably join for the wrong reasons, maybe just to find out, and they don't stick around. You find the people that really are passionate will then join the Hermetic Order of Martinists. And with the Martinists, there's a lot of study and there is a lot of lecture books, and you have to learn a lot. And it's not given lip service, it is a true journey. And so, although I do believe the SRA offers a fantastic line, and you know, you don't need to join the HOM to get the full benefits of the SRIA, it's just another way to get. There are many paths to the final goal. You know, there's many ways to get there.
Great.
That answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Nigel Cooper. Hello, Nigel. Okay. John Lyne.
Oh, it was a very interesting talk. All of these orders that you speak about, they're relatively new orders. What sort of procedure do you have to go through to consecrate an entirely new order to Masonry?
Well, I'm not the right person to ask that question of, John, but to be honest with you, the guys that would be the people to ask is the Masonic Order of Athelstan, because that is the newest order. All the orders that I've talked about are actually older than the Masonic Order of Athelstan. So at the end of the day, I'm talking about English Freemasonry now, no other Freemasonry. UGLE categorically state that they're only interested in craft and chapter, the Holy Royal Arch, and they don't take an interest in any of the other orders. Now, the last 20 years has seen a shift, and they have become a lot closer. However, when I joined Free, we weren't allowed to talk about any other order in a craft lodge apart from the Royal Arch. Things have changed a lot, but it's, you know, it's still, UGLE looks after what it calls Blue Craft Freemasonry and the Royal Arch. And anyone, if they have an original manuscript, can start an order. And as long as you do the right things and you don't bring in, you mustn't ever bring in a candidate from the street. You must always be a Master Mason, because if you did that, you would then be encroaching on UGLE territory. So, as long as you don't go against the edicts of UGLE, there's nothing to stop anyone forming a new order. Whether that succeeds or not is in the wind, but there's absolutely nothing to stop you doing it.
All right, thank you very much.
Pleasure. I hope I'm not going to get into trouble for that one.
Othman.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear Nigel Cooper's question. He's my favorite AVGM. The question is, what's the connection of the Knights of Akka with the orders that you mentioned in? Because we know that the Knights have the Knight Templars have their base in Akka before they moved.
Okay, so Thomas of Akon is a story of the Knights of Acre, right? Which is, and it's based around the legend of Sir Thomas a Becket, who was executed, as you know, in the cathedral. Now, the Knights of Acre were the knights that followed the Knights Templar, the knights conquering the rest of the world, if you like, taking over Jerusalem, and they used to bury the dead. And it was all about giving the dead knights a Christian burial. So, in actual fact, they were very humble. You know, they did carry swords, but their work was all about looking after the dead, rather than. So they followed behind the conquest, what's the word I'm looking for? There was two of them.
Crusaders.
The Jerusalem, the Holy Land, the Crusades. That's it. They looked after the Crusades from behind. And when they consecrated the order, they actually wrote in that you had to be a Knights Templar. It was them that created what you needed to have to become a member. So historically, it linked in with the Knights Templar, but they are separate orders. But historically, they are linked through the fact that the founders decided that they wanted that as a joining requirement.
Thank you very much.
Ted Jacobson? Ted, can you hear us?
Oh, I
You're
was
on.
off. Thank you so much. Now,
Okay.
what is the jurisdiction, or to which jurisdiction would these independent orders belong? Would they belong to the Mark Master Masons, or?
No, Ted, they don't. They're independent. Every one of those orders that I mentioned have an independent Grand Lodge. They are based in England, but for instance, the August Order of Light is run from Halifax. Sir Thomas of Akon, I believe, is run from Derbyshire, Littleover.
I see.
The Hermetic Order of Martinists is run from the Grand Master's office. There's no such, it's not like a jurisdiction, because Grand Lodge, Mark Mason's Hall looks after about 8 or 9 orders.
You're frozen.
Apologies, brethren. We seem to have lost Chris there. We'll give it
Power my question.
It doesn't look after like jurisdiction you're talking.
Chris, sorry, you dropped off there.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Do you want to repeat your answer to Ted?
Yes.
I just said that there are orders, all have their own HQs, and they have none. Mark Mason's Hall has about 9 or 10 orders, but there's something like 19 or 20 orders in the book Beyond the Craft, and there's more orders than that aren't in the book. But each order has its own individual HQ and admin and Grand Master.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anybody else?
That's it.
I think that's
excellent.
Well, I've got a question, Chris.
Go on.
Chris, you mentioned their old Stephen Ayres.
Yeah.
I joined St Andrews, which is TI.
That's right.
I didn't hear you mention that, and I just wondered when it was actually formed.
Right. St Andrew TI was the unit that actually moved out of Blackheath. And it moved several, like I said, it first moved to the St Bride's Institute, and then it moved to the Imperial Hotel.
That's right.
And then it moved, eventually it was at Clerkenwell, and then Clerkenwell got sold. So they moved to Mark Mason's Hall. It wasn't called St Andrews TI when it moved out of Blackheath, but they made that name in honour of Andrew. So it became St Andrews TI because it was the very first one. You know, so that's how it got its name.
Thanks for that. Always
problem.
wanted to know.
Steve? Cove?
Yeah. Hi, thanks. Just a quick one, Chris. So as we know, UGLE look after craft and chapter, and then Mark Mason's Hall have got their own. I remember reading a little while back that there was a decision many years ago that said anything outside of those falls under the jurisdiction of the Allied Masonic degrees. Have they ever sort of tried to gain control of these other orders?
No, never. I mean, some of the orders may or may not cozy up to Mark Mason's Hall. You know, there are some Grand Masters that will cozy up to Mark Mason's Hall. There's others that run a mile from Mark Mason's Hall. That's no opinion of mine. That's just the way it is. KTP have definitely.
That's the one I was thinking. Yeah.
And yet you have to be a Knights Templar, which is run by Mark Mason's Hall, to become a Knights Templar priest, which is an independent body. So they've always worked side by side, Steve. And funny enough, you should say that, because in America, in the USA, the Allied Masonic degrees take a far more prominent role in the York Rite bodies, which they call them. You know, and they look after a lot of the orders, apart from the Scottish Rite and obviously the craft. But that's another. I'm not dealing with American Masonry. Obviously, there's a lot more knowledgeable people about American Masonry than me. Thank you for the question.
All
Anyway.
right, thanks, Chris.
Bruce Perry. Bruce?
Can you hear me now? So,
yes, yes, loud and
really,
clear.
what I wanted to say is that I'm now going to embarrass our speaker, because he has made me feel very awkward tonight, because I've thoroughly enjoyed his speech, and he was exalted into my chapter, which I'm describing, in 1993. He's been the most avid supporter, and we're only a small chapter, there's only 15 of us. He rarely ever misses a meeting, and I didn't realize he was so involved in so many other things apart from one other item. I've thoroughly enjoyed it today, and it's such a pleasure to see him speaking there. One thing I would say, though, that I believe United Grand Lodge are taking more interest in the other orders, because, for instance, on Adelphi now, we have places for other orders on Adelphi, and that I hope will come in when we get Hermes on board and things like that. So
I did actually say that, Bruce. I mean, the last 5 years has been a big improvement on the relationship with UGLE, definitely.
Yeah, and really, Chris, you tonight have gone so sky high in my estimation. You were always fantastic at our meetings, because I could ask him to do, I'll just tell you, if we turn up at a meeting and someone's not there, he's always prepared to stand in, and we're a very small chapter. And Chris, that was marvellous tonight. And on behalf of a lot of people, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you.
Ian Mathers. Ian? Hello?
Yeah, I think I'm on.
You're on.
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, very good. These things are so sensitive.
You're muted.
I'm not muted, am I?
No, he's good now.
We can hear you.
Not now.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. No, Ian Mathers from Blackheath, time immemorial. A few years back, I was looking at my ancestry in the library of the Armagh Cathedral. And I was talking with the librarian, and there was a researcher there who pricked his ears up, and he said, "Did I hear the name Mathers? Because my name's Woodman. And I think, my grandfather was formed the Order of the Golden Dawn with Samuel MacGregor Little Mathers. And your grandfather, great-grandfather, if that was so, was responsible for inducting William Yeats into the order." But then I looked afterwards and found, so far as I could see, that this order was totally extinct. And then I heard Chris suddenly, in a slight side sweep,
Mention it. Where is it? How do I get hold of it? How do I find my ancestors?
Well, Ian, it's an interesting question. I can't really talk much about the Golden Dawn because I'm not a member, but I'll tell you now it is still in existence. And if you look on the websites, if you look up the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, if you Google search it, you will find it. You're on mute again.
Yeah, when I look at, yeah, when I look on the just Google generally, I just find a wiki which says it's all gone.
Well,
but
okay.
But you think there's still alive and kicking, or some aspect
A lot of my
of it.
friends are members, Ian. So
Oh,
yes,
God.
I know it is.
Oh well, maybe you could put me in touch with one of them.
Yeah, well, if Amit will send me your email, I'll send you an email to the person you need to speak to.
Oh, that's splendid. Thank you very much, Chris. Yeah, great.
Make sure Amit has got your email address, and I will send you the details you need.
Yeah.
Actually, Brother Matthew Burt just put the link for the order in the chat box, so that could also help. Let's take one last question. Brother Mullis, you're on mute.
Robert.
I live on mute. My wife makes me do it. Sorry.
Oh yeah. I hear you.
I've
This
got a
is
question.
friend of mine.
Hey Chris. Hey Simon. I've got a question. You were talking about a lot of these orders as they've moved out of the household and into the various places, Mark Mason's Hall and hotels and various other orders. Are they doing anything to archive and protect a lot of these rituals? Because I know I've seen some of the rituals that are produced, and there's a lot of research that goes into making sure that they're as accurate as possible. Do you know if there's like an archive out there where they're...
Robert, I can only speak for the Hermetic Order Martinists because I was very involved in it. Of course, there is a large archive of library of details, and there is the full history of the order, including its association with Blackheath. I know I'm not speaking on behalf of the Archpresident, but I know that Halifax has a full extensive history of the August Order of Light, and I'm pretty sure that the Pilgrim Preceptors, again, the guy that's doing the Eddie, who I must thank Eddie for doing the PowerPoint presentation for me. I know he's done extensive research for the Pilgrim Preceptors, which is all in the hands of the Pilgrim Preceptors. And I'm sure the same goes for the Spiritual Night. John Paternoster was very helpful to me when I was preparing the paper and offered to send a lot of information. So I'm pretty sure that they're all tied up with their archive material, Robert. Yeah.
Okay. And thanks for that. I was curious because I know they're all based on old rituals and things like that, and just curious how they're archiving. Thanks.
Great.
I would like to say it's been lovely to see so many members of the OWF and the other unrecognized orders. I'm sorry for using that awful word because I happily recognize you all as genuine Masons and have never had a problem with it. It's just unfortunate that we can't mix in a lodge room, but it's great to see you all here, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation yourselves.
Thank you, Chris.
We did, thank you. You say we are unrecognized, but if you go back and look at some of the DVDs that I think it took part in your 300 celebrations, when your Deputy Grand Master pledged allegiance to the Queen, he actually also pledged on behalf of the OWF and Women's Freemasons. So our ties are getting stronger.
Yeah, which was wonderful, Karen, and I hope the links continue to get stronger because I think it's very important. I know that there's more of an issue with the co-Masonic lodges, which is, that again, I don't want to get into a political thing here. All I'm saying is it's wonderful that so many of you have joined up with us and to join the presentation, because all this really is a tribute to a wonderful man.
Yeah, it's been very enjoyable, but please be comfortable at calling us brothers.
Yes. Okay, Brother Hilary.
Thank you.
I will.
Chris.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a wonderful evening, and thank you for your support. Thank you.
Chris.
Very much, everyone. Chris.
Brother,
it's
one
been-
moment, please. Can we get Brother Sataris back in, please? Thank you.
Sorry.
Chris, it's been a pleasure. We're grateful for the excellent presentation. I mean, you gave us some insights and open our eyes to like an entire different side of Freemasonry. Thank you very much, Chris. Brethren all, thank you for attending. We'd like to announce our next speaker for next week, which is going to be Right Worshipful Brother John Meek from the Grand Lodge of Illinois, who will be presenting his talk on a holistic approach to Masonry, which is based on his book, Three Distinct Knocks of the Masonic Renewal, Its Basis and Necessity. Also, I'd like to announce our winners for the mugs, which are Brother Pierre Salem and Brother Stephen Turner. I already have their addresses and they will be receiving their bespoke mugs. Brethren, thank you very much. If you'd all like to take a second to say good night.
Good
night. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
See you
very much.
Next week.
So good to see so many of
Good
you
night.
again.
Good night,
everyone.
Thank you for a lovely presentation. Good night.
Good afternoon.
everyone.
Good night. Good night.
Same time, same place next week, hopefully.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Peace, everyone.
Chris, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
I want to know how I can get hold of one of those mugs.
Answer the question correctly.
You'd have to answer the question, Chris. Exactly.
Yeah, you didn't answer the
He's a
question.
speaker.
I didn't. I never got mine.
Oh, did you not?
Good night, Chris. Take care.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, David, for being here.
Good night. God bless people. Bye-bye.
Brethren.
Brethren.
God bless to everyone.